My name is Elena Marlowe, and I have walked through Terminal 4 of Chicago O'Hare so many times I could probably do it blindfolded. I know which security line moves fastest, which TSA agent barely looks up from their scanner, and exactly how early I need to arrive so nothing in my day falls apart. So when my sister Vivian insisted on coming with me that morning, I should have known something was off. She never traveled with me. Not unless there was something in it for her. Till I told myself it was harmless. Just a flight to New York for a business conference. Just another routine day. Vivian was unusually quiet as we stood in line. Too quiet. She kept adjusting her coat, checking her phone, smiling at nothing. That smile, small, controlled, practiced, always meant she was calculating something. "You're nervous?" I asked casually. She shook her head too quickly. "No. Just tired." But her eyes kept drifting, not at me, not at the line, but toward the TSA officers ahead. That's when I felt it. That subtle shift in the air when something is about to go wrong, but no one has said it out loud yet. When we reached the front, I handed over my ID and boarding pass like always. Routine. Familiar. Safe. TSA agent glanced at my documents, then at me. No reaction. Nothing unusual. But then Vivian stepped slightly forward. Not enough to look suspicious. Just enough to be heard. She leaned toward the officer and said something so quiet I didn't catch the words. But I saw his reaction immediately. His eyes changed. Not confusion. Not curiosity. Recognition. That was worse. "Ma'am," he said, shifting his tone, "please step aside for secondary screening." I blinked. Secondary screening? There must be a mistake. The officer didn't answer me. Instead, he pressed a button under the counter. And everything changed in seconds. 2 more TSA agents arrived like they had been waiting behind the walls the entire time. "Step over here, please," one of them said firmly. Vivian didn't move. She just stood there, hugging her coat tighter, watching me like she was waiting for something to unfold. Like she already knew what would happen next. I looked at her. "What did you say?" She gave a small shrug. "Relax, Elena. It's probably just routine," but her voice didn't match her face. It was too calm. Too rehearsed. My documents were taken from my hand. And I suddenly became a problem instead of a passenger. People in line started watching. Phones lowered. Conversations paused. That uncomfortable silence of public suspicion spread behind me like smoke. "Is there an issue?" I asked again, trying to stay steady. No one answered. Instead, I was guided to a separate screening area. And that's when I saw him. The supervisor. He wasn't rushed. Not like the others. He walked with controlled certainty, like someone who had already read the outcome of the situation before stepping into it. He took my passport. Looked at it. Looked at me. Then something in his expression tightened. Not anger. Not doubt. Something closer to recognition. He turned slightly toward the officer beside him and said quietly, "Hold everything. I need a moment with this file." Then he looked back at me again and asked one question that changed the entire temperature of the room. "What is your full legal name again?" And for the first time that morning, I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not fear. Something worse. Confusion that already knew it was about to become truth. I repeated my name slowly, carefully, like saying it louder might make it safer. Elena Marlowe. The supervisor didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned slightly, stepping just far enough away that I couldn't hear the words he spoke into his radio. But I caught fragments, sharp, clipped phrases that didn't belong in a routine screening. Confirm identity, cross-check alert. Marlowe file. My stomach tightened. Vivian stood off to the side, pretending to fix the strap of her bag. That same calm expression. That same controlled silence. but her fingers were moving too fast, like she was counting seconds. I turned toward her again. "Vivian, what did you do?" She finally looked at me directly, and for a second I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Not guilt. Not hesitation. Relief. "I didn't do anything," she said softly. "They just needed to verify you." "That's not how TSA works." She shrugged. Maybe things changed. The supervisor returned before I could push further. He placed my passport on the counter but didn't release it back to me. "Ms. Marlowe," he said, voice lower now, "we're going to need you to step into a private screening room." That sentence alone changed everything. Private screening wasn't routine. Private screening meant flags, alerts, records. Meant someone had already decided I was not just a traveler anymore. I followed them because refusing would only make it worse. The room they led me to was small, sterile, and too quiet. No windows. Just a metal table and a chair bolted to the floor. One officer stayed outside. The supervisor stayed inside with me. He didn't sit immediately. Instead, he studied me like he was comparing me to something unseen. Then he finally spoke. "There is a federal watch note attached to your identity." I froze. "That's impossible," I said immediately. There must be a mistake." He raised a hand slightly, not unkind but firm. "It's not a criminal flag. It's a protective restriction." The words didn't make sense together. Protective restriction? My mind tried to build meaning and failed. He continued, "It was filed several years ago. It activates under specific conditions, one of which is an attempted secondary report at a federal checkpoint." My throat went dry. "Reported by who?" He hesitated just long enough for me to feel it. "Your family." The room tilted slightly, like the air shifted weight. I let out a short laugh, sharp and disbelieving. "That's absurd. My family doesn't file anything like that." My sister was just standing with me. But even as I said it, I thought of Vivian's voice. Too calm. Too precise. Too rehearsed. The supervisor finally opened a sealed digital file on his tablet. I couldn't see the screen clearly, but I saw one line highlighted in red. "Authorized Family Report 2019. My pulse jumped. That was 5 years ago. Before I had my promotion. Before I moved cities. Before everything in my life became what it is now. He looked at me carefully. "Do you know anyone who would have reason to anticipate harm from someone close to you?" I almost said no immediately. But something stopped me. A memory surfaced instead. Vivian smiling at family dinners when I spoke about opportunities she later accidentally got access to first. Vivian asking questions that felt harmless at the time but always ended up somewhere else later. And suddenly I wasn't so sure anymore. Inside the room, I heard footsteps pass by. Vivian's voice faintly in the distance, speaking to someone like nothing unusual was happening. Like I wasn't inside a locked room because of her. The supervisor closed the file. "Ms. Marlowe," he said more quietly now, "someone prepared for this moment a long time ago." And then, before I could respond, he added something that made my entire chest go tight again. "And they signed it with your last name." For a moment, I didn't speak. Not because I had nothing to say, but because my mind refused to accept what I'd just heard. My last name. Signed. Attached to a federal file I had never seen. "That's not possible," I said finally, my voice lower now, steadier than I felt. "I never signed anything like that." The supervisor didn't argue. He simply turned the tablet slightly toward me. I still couldn't see everything clearly, but I saw enough. A scanned document header, official formatting, and a signature line that looked disturbingly familiar. Not mine exactly, but close enough to make my stomach drop. "It was submitted through a legal intermediary," he said. "A power of attorney style filing. It allows a designated family member to act in preventative capacity under specific threat criteria. Threat criteria? I repeated. What threat? I've never been a threat to anyone. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me with something that felt less like suspicion and more like measured concern. That's not what the file claims, he said carefully. My breath caught. The room felt smaller now. The air heavier. Aside, I could hear faint movement, voices, announcements, the normal rhythm of the airport continuing like my life wasn't currently splitting apart inside a locked room. I thought of Vivian again, standing beside me, calm, watching, and suddenly I understood something I didn't want to understand. This is about her, I said quietly. The supervisor didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. Instead, he asked, has there been any recent conflict between you and your sister? I let out a short, humorless breath. There's always conflict. That's normal. She competes with me over everything. Jobs, relationships, even our parents' attention. The words came out easier than I expected. But saying them out loud made something shift inside me. 'Cause I realized I was minimizing it even now. The supervisor closed the tablet. Ms. Marlowe, this file was not created casually. It includes documentation spanning several years. My chest tightened. Several years. I repeated. He nodded. Financial irregularities. Identity overlap. Property-related disputes. That last phrase hit harder than the rest. Property. I thought of my family home. The inheritance discussions that never felt quite honest. The way Vivian always seemed to know things before I did. Before I could process further, the door opened slightly. Another officer stepped in briefly and spoke quietly to the supervisor. I only caught fragments. Secondary subject still in terminal, attempting contact. Secondary subject. Vivian. My sister. My throat went dry. They're talking about her like she's part of an operation, I said. The supervisor looked back at me. At this point, she is part of the record. The words landed too cleanly, too professionally, like my life had been reduced to a file that someone else could step into and edit. I stood up instinctively. I want to leave. The officer at the door didn't move. The supervisor raised a hand slightly. You're not detained, Ms. Marlowe, but we are required to complete verification before release. Verification of what? He hesitated again, then said, whether the concern is active or previously escalated. My hands clenched at my sides, 'cause suddenly I realized something even worse than being falsely flagged. Someone had believed it enough to prepare for years. And whoever that someone was, they had known me long enough to predict this exact moment. The door opened again. A different voice this time. Calmer. Older. You can release her. The supervisor turned immediately. I looked up and saw a man in a senior uniform step inside. His presence changed the atmosphere instantly, not with authority alone, but with familiarity. Like he already knew my name before I spoke it. He looked at me once. Just once. And then said something that made the supervisor go completely still. Remove the hold. She's cleared under Marlowe authorization protocol. My heartbeat stuttered. 'Cause I had never heard of that protocol. And judging by the way the supervisor reacted, neither had he. The room didn't feel real anymore. Felt like I had stepped into a version of my life where everyone else had read a script I was never given. The senior officer stood calmly near the door, hands behind his back, like this entire situation was routine for him. But nothing about this was routine. The supervisor looked at him with immediate tension. Sir, this file is still under active review. The senior officer didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. It's not, he said simply. Then he looked at me again. And this time his expression softened slightly, not with sympathy but recognition. That was the second time I'd seen that look today. And I hated that I didn't know why. "Ms. Marlowe," he said, "do you know the name Arthur Marlowe?" The air left my lungs. My father's name. I nodded slowly. Yes. He was my father. The officer nodded like that confirmed something he already suspected. "Then you need to come with me." The supervisor immediately stepped forward. "Sir, we still have protocol obligations." The older officer didn't even glance at him. Protocol was satisfied when I walked in. That ended the argument instantly. Because whatever authority he carried, it was higher than paperwork. I followed them out of the screening room in silence. Vivian was still somewhere in the terminal. I didn't see her yet, but I could feel her presence like a pressure in the air, as if she was close enough to hear everything without being seen. We stopped in a restricted corridor. No passengers. No noise. Just the hum of security systems and distant announcements. The senior officer finally spoke again. "Your father contacted Federal Protective Services before his death," he said. I blinked. That doesn't make sense. He was sick. He was focused on treatment, not... "He was focused on you," he interrupted gently. That shut me up faster than anything else could have. He reached into a folder and pulled out a sealed document. Not digital this time. Physical. Old-fashioned paper. My name was printed on the front in official formatting. My hand shook slightly as he handed it to me. "Your father established what we call a preemptive familial protection directive," he explained. "It's rare. Extremely rare. It allows intervention if a verified pattern of exploitation or coercion within a family escalates beyond internal resolution." I stared at the document. My father's handwriting was on the signature page. My throat tightened painfully. "He thought someone in your immediate family might eventually attempt to weaponize systems against you," the officer continued. "So he built safeguards." I couldn't speak. Because suddenly every memory I had of my father, his quiet pauses, his careful questions, the way he watched conversations without joining them, shifted into something heavier. Not just love. Preparation. And fear. "He died 6 years ago," I whispered. "He couldn't have known what would happen today." The officer looked at me for a long moment, then said, "He didn't predict today. He predicted behavior." That sentence hit harder than anything else, because it meant this wasn't about one incident. It was about patterns, about people, about Vivian. As if summoned by thought alone, my phone buzzed inside my bag. I ignored it. Buzzed again. Then again. The officer didn't tell me to check it, but something in his expression said I should. I pulled it out. Multiple missed calls. Vivian. Then a message. "Elena, this is ridiculous. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding. They're treating me like I did something wrong." I stared at it. Another message came in immediately after. "You know I was trying to protect you." I laughed once. Not because it was funny. Because it wasn't. The officer watched me carefully. "She's attempting contact." "She always is," I said quietly. And for the first time, I noticed something else in the corridor. A security monitor showing terminal footage. Vivian standing near the exit gates now. Talking to someone rapidly. Pointing. Gesturing. Till performing. Till building her version of reality in real time. The officer closed the folder. "She may not understand what she triggered," he said. "But the system does." And as I looked at my father's signature again, I realized something I wasn't ready to accept fully yet. This didn't start at TSA. It started long before I ever stepped into that airport. I should have felt relieved walking out of that corridor. Instead, I felt exposed. like something had been quietly pulled out of the walls of my life and placed under bright, unforgiving light. The senior officer walked slightly ahead of me, leading me toward a restricted administrative area of the terminal. Not detention. Not release either. Something in between, official enough to feel permanent but temporary enough to keep me unsettled. "You're safe to continue your travel," he said calmly. "But we need you to understand what's in motion." "In motion," I repeated. He nodded. "Your father's directive doesn't just respond. It activates systems. Legal, financial, and federal review channels. That word again, systems. Not people. Systems." It made everything feel colder. We stopped near a private office space inside the airport. He opened the door and gestured me inside. Inside was a single table, 2 chairs, and a second officer already waiting with a laptop open. On the screen was a structured timeline. My name at the top. Below it, years of entries. Not everything was labeled clearly, but I saw enough to recognize fragments of my own life. Banking notes. Property filings. Family correspondence summaries. And Vivian's name appearing more often than mine in certain sections. My chest tightened. "This is surveillance," I said immediately. "It's documentation," the officer corrected. "That's the same thing with better branding." No one reacted to that. The senior officer actually allowed a faint pause of silence before speaking again. "Your father didn't collect this himself," he said. "He authorized independent verification teams over time. Everything here was corroborated." My throat felt dry. "You're telling me he spent years watching my sister?" "No," he said carefully. "He spent years making sure someone else could see what he saw." That distinction mattered more than I wanted it to, because it meant my father hadn't been obsessing. He had been building proof. The second officer turned the laptop slightly toward me. A highlighted entry caught my eye. 2019, unauthorized account access pattern detected, family linked. My breath slowed. That year. The same year the TSA supervisor mentioned. The year everything apparently began. I felt something inside me shift, not anger yet, not fully. Recognition. Slow, uncomfortable recognition. "Vivian accessed my accounts?" I asked quietly. The officer didn't answer directly. Patterns indicate repeated credential overlap and unauthorized benefit transfers over time. My mind flashed through moments I had dismissed before. Passwords changing without explanation. Statements arriving later than expected. Small financial inconsistencies I always rationalized as mistakes. Except they weren't random. They were patterns. Behind me, my phone buzzed again. "Vivian." Again. And again. I turned it face down. "I don't understand how this got to TSA," I said. The senior officer leaned slightly against the table. "Because your sister escalated it," he said simply. That made my head snap up. "What does that mean?" "She made a live report at the checkpoint," he continued. "That triggered the protective protocol verification layer." My stomach sank. "She thought she was just getting me stopped," I said slowly. The officer didn't disagree. She activated a system that was already waiting for confirmation. Silence settled over the room. Heavy. Final. And then, a notification flashed on the laptop screen. Federal Review status updated. The second officer's expression changed slightly. "Sir," he said quietly, "this just moved to enforcement consideration." My pulse spiked. "Enforcement?" I repeated. The senior officer exhaled once, controlled. "Yes," he said, "because your father's directive doesn't only protect you from harm." He paused. "It also responds to verified attempts of coercion involving financial and legal manipulation." I felt my hands go cold. Inside the office, through the glass partition, I finally saw her. Vivian, standing in the terminal, looking around now, no longer calm, no longer rehearsed. Something had started to crack in her composure. She checked her phone again, then looked towards security desks, like she was realizing slowly that the environment around her was no longer responding the way she expected. And for the first time, she looked uncertain. The senior officer followed my gaze. "She still thinks this is about a misunderstanding," he said quietly. I didn't answer, because I was starting to understand something far more uncomfortable. It was never a misunderstanding. It was a long-running truth, finally catching up. Vivian found me near the private exit corridor 20 minutes later. Not escorted. Not stopped. Just allowed to walk right into the space like she still belonged in every version of my life she tried to control. But she didn't look like she controlled anything anymore. Her hair was slightly disheveled. Her phone was still in her hand, screen glowing with unanswered attempts to fix something that was already out of her reach. "Elena," she said quickly, too quickly. "This is insane. You have to tell them there's been a mistake." Her voice had shifted. Not calm now. Not calculated. Pressured. I studied her carefully. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to her, I was observing her. "You made a report at TSA," I said. She froze for half a second. "I was protecting you." "No," I said quietly. "You were trying to control what happened to me." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You don't understand what's been going on in this family." That sentence. That exact sentence. It always came before she rewrote reality. But this time, it didn't land the way it used to. 'Cause I already knew there was a file. I already knew there was a system. And I already knew my father had seen her long before I fully did. A door behind me opened. The senior officer stepped out with 2 additional federal staff members. That was all it took for Vivian's posture to change. Just slightly. A shift in breathing. A recognition that this was no longer personal. It was procedural. "Ms. Vivian Marlowe," the officer said calmly. She straightened immediately. "Yes. We need to discuss the report you initiated at the checkpoint." Her confidence flickered. "I was reporting concern about my sister's behavior." "That's all." The officer nodded slowly, like he had heard that explanation 1,000 times before. "And you are aware," he said, "that false escalation of a protected subject under federal review may trigger counter-investigation?" Her face tightened. That was the first time she looked at me without certainty. Not anger. Not manipulation. Uncertainty. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. 'Cause something had already shifted beyond either of us. The officer continued, "There are documented financial and legal discrepancies associated with your identity linked to protected accounts." Vivian let out a short, disbelieving laugh. This is ridiculous." But her voice cracked at the end. Just slightly. "Enough." The senior officer turned his attention to me. "Ms. Marlowe," he said gently, "your father's directive is now fully active in recovery phase." Recovery phase. Not protection. Not review. Recovery. I felt something tighten in my chest. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," he said, "the system is now restoring what was identified as improperly diverted or manipulated." A long silence followed. Then the words I didn't fully expect, but somehow already understood. "That includes property, financial assets, and legal ownership corrections." Vivian went still. Completely still. Like the floor beneath her had finally stopped pretending to be stable. "No," she said softly. "No, that's not possible." But even she didn't sound convinced anymore. 'Cause somewhere deep down she already knew. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't random. This was delayed consequence. I stepped slightly forward for the first time. Not toward her. Not away from her. Just forward. Did you think, I said quietly, that nothing would ever catch up to you? Her eyes flicked to me, and for the first time in my entire life, she didn't have an answer ready. The officer closed his folder. Everything initiated in 2019 has now reached enforcement completion, he said. Then he looked at me. Ms. Marlowe, you are clear to proceed. Your father ensured there would be no further interference. I stood there for a moment, listening to the airport noise return in the distance. Normal life continuing somewhere beyond this corridor. Vivian wasn't speaking anymore. Not fighting. Not performing. Just standing in the truth she could no longer negotiate with. I picked up my bag slowly, and as I walked toward the exit, I finally understood something I hadn't been able to name since the TSA line. My father hadn't just protected me. He had outlived the damage long enough to make sure it couldn't outlive me.